and welcome back. My name is Zauner, and today we're gonna talk about some of my favorite books that I've read thus far at the time of filming this. And I thought to myself, there were like 10-15 that I definitely wouldn't recommend, so we're left with like 30 that I have to choose from. Let's make it top 3. Yeah, that didn't work. So I had to lock myself down and be like, okay, which books are we gonna choose? I ended up with a top 5. And then we have some honorable mentions. There's a classic in there, we have some fantasy, we have some historical fiction, we have some contemporary. We like to mix it up on this channel. We don't contain ourselves to one genre. And honestly, that's how I like to read. Let's start off with the first one, which I read in January. So love it. I got it as a recommendation from a friend. We've then recommended it to other friends. Now I'm gonna recommend it to you. I have talked about this before. It's The Once and Future Witches by Alix E. Harrow. Love it. Fantasy, sort of like historical fiction, different timeline. We have the blurb. In 1893, there's no such thing as witches. There used to be in the wild, dark days before the burnings began, but now witching is nothing but tidy charms and nursery rhymes. If the modern woman wants any measure of power, she must find it at the ballot box. But when the Eastwood sisters, James Juniper, Agnes Amaranth, and Beatrice Belladonna join the suffragettes of New Salem, they begin to pursue the forgotten words and ways that might turn the woman's movement into the witches' movement. Stalked by shadows and sickness, haunted by forces who will not suffer a witch to vote, and perhaps not even to live, the sisters will need to delve into the oldest magic, draw new alliances, and heal the bond between them if they want to survive. I really enjoyed this book. It is a bit of a bigger read. I think it's worth it. Basically, you get these 3 sisters, they've gotten estranged from one another, and they find themselves back in New Salem. Like, they find each other in New Salem again, also around the time that women are fighting to get the vote. And these 3 sisters realize, like, the way that the suffragist movement is going, it can use a little bit more pack of a punch. And they do that through magic. They have learned some when they were younger. It's usually small nursery rhymes. So what you end up with is a story that talks about love and loss and family dynamics, and mostly sibling dynamics, and what kind of effect their past has on their future self, and good versus evil, and feminism, and dark powers and good powers and magic, and how the view of people can change whole societies and towns and dynamics. And honestly, this is a book that is delved into, like, I think sort of 3 different parts, where we talk at the beginning, kind of like the building up of the witches movement and how they came to be, and like how they make sure that the suffragettes movement. Then the second part is how they use their magic to further their agenda of feminism, and how they're allowed to vote and should get rights. And then the last part is more focused on the good versus evil of magical powers. But through it all, and I think the red line through this entire story, is the bond that these 3 sisters have, and how important that is to their story, and how much of an effect and impact they have on each other. And I loved it. It's still a book that I do really recommend to people. So if you're kind of looking for a darker novel, and we're talking about women and empowered women, and want to read like some fantasy in there and like some historical fiction, this is your girl. This is the one that I definitely recommend. The second one that I read, I think January, is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a non-fiction book by Chanel Miller, who went to court to do a sexual assault case, and she kind of describes the story of like what happened, but also how that whole process went. And why I like this book is that it was very impactful, but I think that Chanel has like a really great way of describing what it is like to experience the world as a woman, and how you kind of have to view the world differently than what other people see. And like, she went through this thing, like through this whole process that was very traumatic and everything that came with it. And she describes it so well, and it's such a great way with words and describing it that I often had to put the book down. But I think that this is someone that, if you have experienced sexual assault or trauma from that, or even if you haven't and you just live in this world and you feel like, hey, I belong to the 98%, I think that this is a book that offers a lot of recognition. And the fact that she describes how a lot of other women are also affected by this, and how the system often fails women in this aspect, and also men who have experienced sexual assault. It is a really book, and if you think like, I just want to understand that more, like what is it like, just read it. It is a hefty book, obviously trigger warnings of all of those things, and if you want to do nothing to like, don't read this book. She does kind of describe what it was like, and she does describe the whole process, and obviously it grapples that as a main subject. It's kind of a memoir non-fiction, and it's probably one of the best ones that I've ever read. Okay, so I'm halfway through filming right now, and I am going through the books, and I am realizing that all of the books that I'm going to mention in this video do have their own trigger warnings. Apparently, I like to read books that deal with a lot with mental health and things that like come with it. So please research trigger warnings. So I do advise, please Google the trigger warnings on these books. All right, let's get going with the 5 that I am top 5 of this year. The next read that I have is The Belgier by Sylvia Plath. It's our classic of the year that I really liked most, and this is the blurb. Working as an intern for a New York fashion magazine in the summer of 1953, Esther Greenwood is on the brink of her future, yet she is also on the edge of a darkness that makes her world increasingly unreal. Esther's vision of the world shimmers and shifts. Day-to-day living in a sultry city, her crazed men friends, the hot dare dances. I think that is really well done. I think that it is that book that also like has a way of describing in like metaphors what this character is going through in her depression, and how she views the world, and how that limits her, and how she experiences society, and how society deals with her, basically. I think this is one of those books that not only tells a story with like literal words that are written on the page, but also very much the story that's written that's like between the lines. Like there is so much that is left unsaid, yet at the same time that story also comes to the forefront, if I'm explaining that well. So it's kind of like this story that is a lot more and tells a lot more than just what's written down on the page. And I feel like the way that the struggle of mental health is written is just done really well. So yeah, if you feel like I want to read a classic, but I also like, I think the Day describes like a modern classic, but we're over 50 years further. If you want to start a classic that does talks about women's point of view, female point of view, mental health, and how society views it, I do feel like this is a really good book. So definitely one of my favorites for this year. The next book that I really enjoyed is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. I'm gonna read you the blurb. Yaa and Essie, 2 sisters with 2 very different destinies. One sold into slavery, one a slave trader's life. The consequences of their fate reverberate through the generations that follow. From the Gold Coast of Africa to the plantations of Mississippi. From the missionary schools of Ghana to the dive bars of Harlem. Spanning continents and generations, Yaa Gyasi has written a miraculous novel. I really enjoyed it, because what this book does is that by staying into like one family, sort of like these 2 are half sisters, they don't really know each other, but by staying into the same family branches basically and going from generation to generation, you get to know the evolution basically of US and African Americans and the like the Gold Coast. Because this story like starts out with Yaa and Essie, and then you get like they get like their stories, and then the story of their children and the children of their children, and then like so on and so forth up until like this day, and how choices that are made maybe 3 generations ago still affects you to this day. That things that are chosen like hundreds of years ago, what happened hundreds of years ago, still has a very clear impact on this day and age. And just because it's like generation upon generation, you keep that like red thread throughout the book and see the differences between those two branches that come out. So yeah, historical fiction, and love it. The last book that I'm recommending, or that I loved this year, is Holding Her Breath by Eimear Ryan. This is a contemporary novel. I'm gonna read you the blurb. A young woman comes of age in the shadow of her family's tragic past. When Beth Crow starts university, she's shadowed by the ghost of her potential as a competitive swimmer. Free to create a fresh identity for herself, she finds herself among people who adore the poetry of her grandfather, Benjamin Crow, who died tragically before she was born. She embarks on a secret relationship and on a quest to discover the truth about Benjamin and his widow, her beloved grandmother Lydia. The quest brings her into an archive that no scholar has ever seen, and to a person who knows things about her family that nobody else knows. So I really enjoyed this novel because it has such a great way of... It's a coming of age novel. It is a novel that deals with like family trauma, but also family secrets and relations within that, and what for an effect it can have on younger people, like on Beth herself, and how that impacts her life. Things that are mentioned and things that aren't mentioned. Things that we know and things that we don't know. And obviously she's in a different spotlight because her grandfather is like the more modern day Shakespeare of Ireland. Like everyone loves it. Everyone trying to dissect what did he actually say. Like he's this tortured artist, and I think he's put on this pedestal where she gets like, I am really legitimately living with the consequences of his actions and the consequence of his art, and for something that he was very passionate about. She tries to get to know the life of her grandfather and who he was and what that all means. It's like she slowly learns about it, and you recognize the impact of every single step it has on her. I think in no means is it like a slow paced book. I would legit say medium paced book, and I would recommend it. I think this is one of the better contemporary novels that I've read this year, and I did really highly recommend. Okay, so we're gonna very quickly do the honorable mentions because I've been talking about this top 5 way too long. 1. Crying in H-mart by Michelle Zauner. Honestly, you've probably seen this book come by 1,000 times. I am also one of those people who recommend it. I did really enjoy it, especially in the sense that I recognized certain thought process, and also yes, you will cry, and yes, you will end up being hungry. Then A Magic Steeped in Poison, which is really well done. It's basically about this girl who lives in a world where brewing tea, and tea has magical powers, and some people are capable of brewing tea in a certain way and have certain powers for that. She is one of them. She ends up going to the capital to become the new tea master, because if she wins this competition, if she becomes the official royal tea master, she can ask for a favor, and she wants to do that because her sister is very sick. You follow her on the journey of this competition. Obviously a lot happens. We have rebellion, we have royalty, we have magic, we have certain powers at play. Then we're gonna finish off with some romance novels, because I think these were like the books by Stephanie Archer, which is The Wrong Mr. Right and That Kind of Guy. It plays itself, Vancouver Island. They're easy, they're simple, but I really enjoyed them, especially because this is gonna be like, I think, a longer series. Like I think they're gonna be 4 books in total, because what she does, you have this family with 4 brothers, and you kind of gonna follow every book. You follow one brother, fall in love, have a different storyline, like a different trope. You have the enemies to lovers. We have the fake, well no, we don't know. We have fake dating and friends to lovers. Okay, so the first one, which is That Kind of Guy, is a fake dating trope, and The Wrong Mr. Right is friends to lovers. I think the next one, which I'm most excited about because I enjoy Holden, he's got a bunch of lines. I think he's very funny. He's the grumpy one, and I think the other one's gonna be like Grumpy Sunshine trope. These are just very enjoyable romance novels. I've read a few this year, but these ones are the ones that I've liked the most so far. So yeah, you want to read a romance novel? Read That Kind of Guy and The Wrong Mr. Right. So these are some of my favorites of this year. At the end of the year, I'm gonna do probably also like some of my favorites. Maybe my top 5 will have changed. If we're gonna get to a top 5, I'm gonna, you know what, I am gonna challenge myself to keep a top 5 at the end of the year, and we'll see which ones have survived and which ones haven't. Until then, I'll see you guys again next week. And yeah, like I wanted to say, up until then, happy reading!